Hello and welcome to the Overly Animated Podcast, where we take animation seriously. We provide fan-oriented and analytic discussions on a variety of animated shows, movies, and anime, including Steven Universe, Gravity Falls, Ruby, and Rick and Morty. I am your main host, Dylan Hysen, and today I'm joined by Melanie Moyer.
Hello.
Hey, Mel.
Hello.
Ready for another Pixar discussion podcast here?
Oh, always.
Do you think we're going to go through everyone, just us two? Depends.
I don't know. We might be the only people who care enough about.
I think other people care about.
There
Pixar,
might be one or two that.
Yeah. We'll see how these go. So this is a WALL-E retrospective podcast, and if you see retrospective in the title, that just means it's not a current movie. We're probably going to treat it mostly the same, except it's going to be less a review, probably, and more discussion. Whereas when we talked about Inside Out, it was like discussing the quality and whether you should go see it. Everyone's already seen WALL-E, right? So we're not going to be as concerned with that. And yeah, this is in our period of podcasts before we get back to those shows I listed in the beginning, before they have new episodes again. So we're going to be talking about more old movies and stuff until we get there, and hopefully go through the entire Pixar catalog at some point, in addition to the Studio Ghibli catalog. That's kind of the plan. So WALL-E, it came out in 2008, which seems absurd.
Wow.
That was, that was 7 years ago. Directed by Andrew Stanton. The crazy thing about it coming out 7 years ago is I remember highly anticipating this movie. I remember the trailers, and I guess I was 14 then. I don't know.
That was freshman year of high school.
That's very odd that it's been.
It's very odd that Dylan was 14.
That it's been that long. I don't know. So WALL-E, I guess WALL-E for me personally meant a lot when it came out, and I had a pretty big reaction to it, and I haven't seen it in quite a while. And so we both just rewatched it. When was this your first time since watching it?
It was a while. When I first got it on when it came out on DVD or Blu-ray or what have you, I watched it religiously, constantly, that was my movie for a long time. It's definitely been over a year though since this last time that I just watched it. Now it's been quite a while. Over
a year? That's
yeah, no.
But it's been 7 years since it came out.
Well, no, I mean a year since I last watched it.
I know, but that means you've seen it recently, kind of. That's good. Yeah. Okay. So I think WALL-E has an interesting place in Pixar's legacy. It's a lot of people view it as Pixar's best film. You see it as number one on a lot of lists. It's also potentially the last great Pixar movie, depending on where you view this. Mm-hmm. Maybe Up, because that was after this one.
I have unpopular opinions about Up, but that's for something else.
Maybe we'll talk about that when we get to that one. But yeah, WALL-E, I think it's interesting because at the time I kind of thought it was like a new age Pixar movie. The animation was incredible. The animation still holds up really well.
Yeah.
It's I think going from something like A Bug's Life to WALL-E, which I guess is a similar period from WALL-E to now, that's a huge difference. Whereas WALL-E to now, I don't think is a big difference in animation quality. I don't think we've moved significantly beyond WALL-E's quality.
No.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess let's get into it. What did you think of WALL-E now? What did you think of WALL-E when it came out? How has your opinion changed? How has it not? Stuff like that.
When it came out, it was definitely a surprise. Just because I didn't expect it. People always make that joke about Pixar movies. They're like, "Oh, what if bugs had feelings? What if toys had feelings? What if robots had feelings?" And now with Inside Out, it's what if feelings had feelings. But it was just very surprising, and it's not that I didn't expect it to be good because it's Pixar, and at that time, Pixar really could really do no wrong. But just the amount of what was going on in there, I think, was particularly surprising. Now, I still love it a lot. I think it's got some of the best characterizations of any Pixar film. And even with the sort of how it gets to at the end with the sort of PSA, I still think it holds up really well as a film.
Yeah, I think in terms of holds up, this could have came out this year. Yeah. I think maybe animation quality, production quality, but also in terms of storytelling, message, themes, they're all still very relevant today. maybe even more relevant now, you know, which probably is something that you would have said 2 years ago. It's just going to continue. I mean, it's an environment and stuff, right? So it's always going to come.
Yeah, and I think that's what's interesting about it is because there's two facets to the movie you can look at. It's one, it's the environmental stuff that it's talking about there, and then it's also the sort of quote unquote like human drama going on amongst the various robots and Eve and Wally. So, and I think those things play together very well, and I think both of them are lasting very well.
Yeah, and I think maybe even more so than environmentalism, the big take home for me is like, I don't know if this is a word, corporationism, just basically
capitalism.
Yeah, something like that. The evilness of big corporations. Really, I think that's what the movie's kind of about. But which is interesting.
Yeah.
Now that Pixar's owned by Disney and stuff, one of the biggest corporations on the planet. Yeah, for me, WALL-E when it came out was the greatest thing ever. Probably when it came out was like my favorite movie ever of all time, along with a few Miyazaki movies. And I would still say this is probably my first time rewatching it in years. I've probably seen it once or twice after it was out, but not in a while. To me, it held up well in all aspects. It's still the best Pixar movie for me. It's still one of the best movies I've ever seen. A lot of people like certain parts of it, but not others. I genuinely like all of it. Comparing it to something like Inside Out, which we just watched and which just came out, the characterization in this just seems so much better. It's so much deeper. To me, the plot seems better, less forced. It follows it certainly gets into like a narrative arc that is not completely unexpected, but is certainly not the same narrative arc in Inside Out, which we see in almost every movie recently. Like the journey to get back to somewhere. Wally kind of has this insidious, like lurking behind the background villain, and it's not that that's incredibly original, but at least to me it works better. The romance between Wally and Eve, that's something that meant a lot to me when I first watched it. I was much more into romance stuff in high school, I would say. That was maybe one of the most important. Yeah, well, typical probably girl, but for me too. The romance plotlines were some of the most important and like meaningful to me, and so this movie was just insane. Like in terms of it has like the incredible characterization it does. Yeah. It focuses on romance. It focuses on like robots, which are technology, something meaningful to me too. And now it doesn't mean as much the romance between Wally and Eve, but I still think it's still very well done. I mean, in terms of practicality, the thing that I noticed more watching this one is I was trying to figure out like the logic behind the robots having personality, which is probably dumb, but I've seen a lot of artificial intelligence movies lately, and that's a big interest of mine. And it's like, okay, does Wally have an artificial intelligence? Do all these random robots? The answer is I don't think you should think about that because it doesn't really make sense. But
it's the future.
I mean, yeah, it's 2700, right? Then,
I mean, at this point in time, though, there's been developments in AI where they've shown that AI technologies can learn things. So
it's certainly
I don't think
not,
it's not possible. It's
well, we're talking like Wally, like having a personality. You know, that's not.
He's had a lot of
something we
time
have
with
now.
With his career.
Right. Well, that's the thing. Wally is 2100's technology in the movie. He's not even 20. So it doesn't really make sense that he would just get an artificial intelligence from existing for 600 years. But, obviously, again, we're not supposed to think about these things. How does Inside Out make any sense? How does any of these movies make any sense? I don't know. I think that's what's great about. Last podcast we just talked about when Marnie was there, and that I won't spoil it, but it has like logical leaps that were not established in the beginning of the movie. But the difference with Pixar movies is that the fantasy elements are just there from the beginning. They're well established within the mythology of the movie. So like Wally just being like a person is not something that's unbelievable because we see it from second one of the movie, right?
Yeah.
So like subsequently Eve having personality, but all of the other Eve droids not, and all of the other ones we don't really see the other ones, but it also makes sense given the establishment of the mythology. specifics of Wall-E, I guess there's two phases to Wall-E. There's the first 20 minutes, half an hour. In typical Pixar fashion, we have the beginning and then the rest of it, like Up. And then there's the stuff in outer space. A lot of the opinion I hear a lot is that the beginning 20, 30 minutes, which are almost silent, are brilliant. And then once they get into space, it's not as good, but still maybe okay.
Yeah, I mean, I guess maybe it's the inclusion of the humans that maybe takes you out of it a little bit, because the beginning is so powerful with Wall-E just sort of roaming around and just looking at his world, and then you sort of get into these very, I don't like to use the word cartoony, but a lot of the people on the ship, that's how they're portrayed. So I feel like it maybe dumbs itself down a little bit in that regard in terms of like animation style and tone. It still ends up being a very important story when you realize what's being said by this cruise ship in space. But I can see where that's coming from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think it's the beginning of the movie is certainly brilliant. I think it's a feat of storytelling, really. Just with almost no dialogue and one character, what you can establish about the world building they do, along with the characterization of Wall-E. And certainly some of it is blatant, like they just have screens pop up with exposition, but I think it's integrated well enough that it really works. But
there are some scenes of action in there too, I think. It's minimal, but...
Yeah. And to me, like, yes, we focus less on Wall-E's character, and then it kind of becomes one note when we get to space on Wall-E's love for Eve. But what the thing that interests me about the space parts, and I think those parts, I disagree with like what a lot of people say that those aren't as good. I think they're also incredible, and I think that those focus more on the progression of like the state of humanity and humans and Earth, and I find all of that incredibly well done and just very fascinating look at. Like, the human characters are cartoony and stuff, but they're also just, like, very not important. They're on screen for so little. And it's really interesting focusing on these robots instead of the humans and how we learn about the future of humanity from them. Mm-hmm. I just the progressive storytelling of, by and large, space evacuation, stuff like that, I think is just so well done. I also just love how it's like the villain is like Otto, right? But at the same time, the villain's not Otto. The villain is just something that happens that's a result of humanity and by and large's bad decisions from our glimpses of past Earth.
Yeah.
Which is I don't know, profound. It's interesting. It's a scathing commentary of capitalism and corporations and their role in the world. I think it's just so very telling that it's not the governments of the world doing everything. It's just this one company. Mm-hmm. It's kind of fascinating how this movie gets made, right? With that kind of story. It's hidden, but at the same time, I think Disney owned Pixar again by 2008.
Yeah, Disney owned Pixar.
They owned them in the beginning, then they didn't own them, and then they did again.
Yeah.
But I think by 2008 they did own them again.
Yeah, they did.
Yes. We'll
I want to say Wall-E was one of the early ones of them owning them again.
So, like, Disney making this movie is interesting.
Yeah.
Personally, this is something I feel, the evilness of corporations, right?
Yeah.
So it's quite an interesting message. It's not, and it's almost not even environmentalism. Like, yeah, it is. Like, yeah, you have to pick up your trash, but it's almost just the direction of humanity under different.
Environmentalism, I think, is more of a side effect of the corporation than
I think than
anything else.
Yeah, that's what I would say.
Which is interesting because I do think people take away a lot the environmentalist message while ignoring the corporation message, which is behind it, because it is sort of like played up for comedy and it is sort of in the background, but it's also the root cause of the environmental issues. And then even Otto, who was programmed by humans and just acting on what his programming was. So I think that's interesting.
Yeah, it's hard not to see the message as we see Fred Willard as the the by and large CEO throughout the movie, and he's not inherently unsympathetic, right? You kind of relate for him. You can tell he's going through what everyone else is going through as well. But like at the same time, it's just very clear that everything is his fault.
Yeah,
That's just very clearly what the movie is saying, and it's interesting seeing this relatable. Even though he's on screen maybe a minute total, you know, I feel like he's kind of interestingly characterized in his own way.
it's also interesting that he's the only live action human.
He's a live action human within this. Yeah, that was an interesting choice. Somehow it works.
Yeah,
I don't really know how, but I think it does.
I think it also helps the message too that the one live action human was the sort of corporate bigwig.
Yeah.
I think it wouldn't have been as profound if it was an animated character.
Yeah, and so those are really meaningful to me. And I know when this movie released, Pixar also had a lot of like internet promotional material with By and Large, like they had a website and they had stuff like that, which is pretty cool for 2008, I guess. But
Yeah.
I just think the narrative elements of By and Large throughout the movie are excellent, like so well integrated, so well done. Let's talk Eve, I guess. We haven't really talked Eve much.
She's a Mac computer.
She's very kind of clearly a Mac. It's a little. It's interesting that she also has a personality, given that she's like this high tech new robot. You know. Mm-hmm. I don't know. What do you think of Eve? Do you think she's a good character?
Yeah, I'd say that her personality, I mean, it was definitely there a little bit in the beginning, but I think it was sort of evolved with her interactions with Wally, more so that she was this random robot of this line of robots that happened to have a personality. Because when she first showed up, she scanned him, she went away, went about her business to try and find plant life. So I think because I feel like Wally's kind of a static character. I think she's the one with the arc out of the two of them, which is interesting.
Yeah, Wally's arc is more of just him developing this relationship with Eve, right? Mm-hmm. Whereas Eve is like caring about Wally and caring about things that aren't her directive.
Yeah.
Yeah, she does. I think the movie is trying to say that she like kind of gains humanity through Wally. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's trying to say Wally gains humanity through being on Earth for so long and transfers it to the people he interacts with on the ship who've kind of just lost the sense of themselves.
Yeah. Yeah, which is why it's interesting because he is such a good character, and it's very difficult, I think, in writing to create these sort of very well done static characters whose job it is to be static and to not really arc. The most famous example is Atticus Finch in To Kill a Mockingbird, but I think Pixar does it great with Wally because you watch just how much, not even like it's Eve, it's that couple on the ship, it's the captain, just the way he sort of brings a humanity to these different characters, and they're the ones changing.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, we can talk about the captain. I think he was very well done as well. Mm-hmm. Voiced by Jeff Garlin. It's a pretty simple character, a pretty simple arc. Opens his eyes, discovers things about Earth, wants to go back to Earth, you know. But very sympathetic, kind of shows... This movie's very down on humans and humanity, and I guess the captain is kind of the main break point for us. Mm-hmm. And again, I think I said this already, but it's interesting how all of our viewpoints throughout this are done. Things like humanity is saved through Wally and Eve and also the captain too, but rather than like the actual humans we see there. What do you think of so I mentioned it in the beginning. What do you think of what ends up being the main narrative of this? I think Pixar movies often begin with an interesting concept, and then have an interesting beginning. And then once we have to get into, and then it's like, oh, we have to make a movie now. We have to have a narrative. And you can speak to this much better than I can. But here's how I'll like try to introduce it. There's clearly a group of movies, I think, from Pixar that have an interesting concept, a beginning, and then they have to do something. And when they do something, it's not as original as the concept in the beginning. Mm-hmm. Up is the clearest example of this. but I think it's the same thing for WALL-E, and I think it's the same thing for Inside Out. Interesting concepts, interesting beginnings, maybe even, I don't remember as well, but maybe even things like Ratatouille, I'm not sure.
Yeah, no, like what ends up happening in terms of narrative arcs in film, and this is something we talked about in my screenplay class, is that films aren't concepts. Films are never about concepts. Films are about something else. Like the example we used is, if you've seen The Social Network isn't about a guy trying to it isn't about a guy making Facebook. It's about a guy trying to get back together with his girlfriend, and the result is Facebook. So what goes on here is the concept is there's a lonely robot, the only moving thing on the planet. But the movie isn't about the environmentalism or the robot or this sort of evilness of corporations. It becomes a love story. Like, that's what the movie's about. And that's the same thing with something like Toy Story. The interesting concept of toys come to life, but it's a buddy comedy. With Inside Out, it's interesting concept about looking inside someone's head, but the story is a coming of age story. That's happens in generally most films will follow a similar pattern, where you've got this interesting concept, but at the end of the day, the narrative ends up becoming, or has to become, something familiar like that, some known story arc.
So I guess for WALL-E, what the movie is actually about, kind of, you say it's about a love story, and I think that's true, because WALL-E has a lot going on, right? So it's this love story arc throughout the entire thing, which might be in the DNA of the movie. I could see that being there. It's kind of set up from the very beginning. But then the other thing is this whole take humanity back to Earth thing and the mutiny on the ship, right? So that ends up being, that's like the literal plot of the movie.
Yeah.
So how well do you think each of those were executed?
I think they're executed well, especially because they're executed on top of each other, and it could have easily been a mess or just very confusing as to what you want to pay attention to. But I think they sort of crisscrossed and overlapped just so well. And I think the credit for that goes to just WALL-E's character and the way he's integrated into every one of these pieces of the story that end up coming together at the very end.
Yeah, I agree. I think they work. I don't, on their own, neither one is maybe inherently that strong, especially the mutiny in the ship arc. It's not inherently interesting what's going on with Otto and the captain. We don't know them very long. But I think what's maybe more interesting, and maybe the element that kind of ties them together and gives them both meaning, is the fate of humanity, which I kind of talked about before. As we learn more about the past of this post-apocalyptic world for humanity, and what's going on with them, what the future of humanity holds. I really think that gives meaning to the Wally and Eve romance, as they're giving humanity kind of, and how they're saving humanity, and how the same thing's kind of going on with the captain opposing Otto.
Yeah. And that's interesting with Eve and Wally, because there was this quote way back in the day from Walt Disney about the Mickey Mouse cartoons, and how what he said, when people laugh at Mickey Mouse, it's because he's so human. And I think that's sort of the element here that's tying all these things together and making them interesting, is that you are finding humanity in odd places, I guess. Because you've got robots, you've got space, you've got people that kind of forgot what humanity on Earth was like, and it's ends up being, I guess, that kind of story. I don't know if there's a specific trope name for it, but it's
yeah,
it's the discovering humanity aspects that normally you find in just one character. So it's interesting to see it playing in an entire world.
Yeah, and kind of we're talking about how humanity is like, Wally like gains humanity through interactions on Earth, and that's kind of actually literally stated through his watching the Hello Dolly tape. That's kind of, I guess it's not that subtle, right? He's learning about humans from watching that tape, right? And he wants to feel that for himself. And then Eve kind of has that same element. And it's kind of like how past humanity before this post-apocalyptic environmental disaster is restored via learning about humanity post-apocalyptic with Hello Dolly tape, Wally's interactions with items throughout the world, and then even the captain looking stuff up about the Earth through the computer on in the spaceship. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting formalizing these themes because I don't think I necessarily like inherently understand them. Or not inherently understand. I don't think I inherently like put them into words through watching the movie.
Yeah. And it's interesting to see how stratified they end up being when you sort of pick it apart, and then how connected they end up being by the end. Because again, it's just there's so much going on in it, and it's executed so well that you don't even notice that there's so much going on in it.
Yeah, it's kind of there's a lot of narrative arcs that we've just mentioned, all of them like interweaving throughout. They're also just relatively simple things too, which I think is maybe a positive of the movie, that it keeps everything so simple. Random thing to talk about is how these robots are portrayed gender-wise, because I think that's relevant. We kind of talked about that with the Inside Out podcast. The robots are very gendered, I would say. I think Eve more so than Wall-E, right?
Yeah.
Eve is just very clearly female, and she's even called she, which I don't know if Wall-E is ever called him.
I don't know. I mean, I guess the assumption is yes, because he's so clearly coded as being male. But
yeah, I think he's coded as being male, and he's like voiced by a man. But I think it would make sense from a logical perspective to call all the robots she, but like it wouldn't make sense to call some she and some he. Like, why would you do that?
Yeah.
So maybe it maintains some semblance of sense by only referring to Eve as she and not getting into Wall-E's gender. What do you think of just genderfying the robots?
That's something I was thinking about when I was watching it. So I'm glad you brought it up. I'm not entirely sure how I feel about it, because I think it's both good and bad. I think it does serve a fairly good narrative purpose, but at the same time, I think that they were very clearly gendering one as female and sort of coding a bunch of them as male wasn't that great, because these are things that don't necessarily need a gender. And it would have been very complex, but it also would have been interesting to see the same story play out if they hadn't been gendered at all, and it was just sort of a they situation. But I have good and bad feelings about that.
Yeah, so I think narratively, they do this to try to have us empathize with the robots earlier. Yeah, easier, right? And it's easier to empathize with this. This is just very typical movie. This male, just finding
it's very
this
boy
female.
meets girl.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
And like on one hand, okay, while Eve is a female character, it's kind of progressive. She's obviously the stronger one, obviously the more advanced model and stuff like that. And like that's all good and stuff, but Wall-E's the one we care about. He's the main character, and he's a male, so it's typical Pixar in that regard. So I'd say from a narrative perspective, it's helpful. From a social perspective, it's extremely heteronormative.
Yes.
Yeah. Here you have two robots that are not male or female, and we're making them male and female, and they're falling in love, so they have to be male and female because that's the only way romances work, right? So it's frustrating on that level. Like why, like specifically the chances of one being male and one being female, and then them also being male and female in this configuration is like 25% given the probabilities. So it's this exact configuration.
Or the Punnett squares.
Yeah, dude, the Punnett squares. This exact configuration of the main character's male, the love interest is female, and they're not the same gender, right? So,
yeah, and if you look at it in world, sort of in the universe, it's, I guess you could say, this is not intended at all, but you could look at it as a sort of commentary on the people that made them, the fact that they felt the need to sort of, this is not a word, binarize, make them binary, yeah. Make them binary. I was hoping there was a word for that, but whole sentence, make them binary in that regard. But I think that's also a commentary on Pixar itself and sort of the nature of filmmaking, where we have to gender the robots to make their love story something that people will care about, apparently.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it doesn't make sense if you're going to try to explain it in world, because like I was talking about with the artificial intelligence. Yeah, it really doesn't work. But So you kind of, I think a lot of people would, like, they're listening to us talk about this, and the people who get actively upset over mentions of social progress, those idiots, right? They're listening to us say this, and then they're saying, oh, it's the people create them like that, right? That's going to be they're like, obviously that's true, but no, that makes no sense. They can't have these artificial intelligence anyway. So you have to given that we can make the robot like Wall-E who can and act like that and who has personality, then we're going to make him male too. Eve is the one that would maybe make more sense making female. I don't know.
You could make the argument that sort of Wall-E's male-esque qualities came from watching Michael Crawford in Hello, Dolly.
Oh, I like this. Wall-E takes on the gender characteristics of a male because he consumes the media and items of a male world, a male-dominated world.
Yeah, because he keeps watching that same dance scene over and over again, which is all dudes. So
I like that. And
doesn't explain the other possibly coded robots, but
yeah, true. Well, the other robots make less sense.
Yeah.
The one who cleans has personality.
The one hairdresser one too is. Well, I guess that makes sense too. Why
the hairdresser one seems the hairdressing robot actually just seems like a robot. I don't think that robot has personality.
It's got a female voice.
Female voice, but it just repeats the same thing over and over, right?
Yeah, so. I guess it's just stereotypical hairdresser.
Yeah, robot. Which is what they're going for. That one I could see being created. Yeah, but yeah. So, but at the same time, okay, Wall-E. We're going off the theme of Wall-E gets assigns himself a male gender because of consuming stuff throughout the world, but then that's also seen kind of as a good thing by the movie because Wall-E is such a force of good. Mm-hmm. So, still don't love that in terms of social progress overall. No. But it's not, I don't know. On one, it's these are incredibly, not only secondaries, or like tertiary things that come to mind when talking about this movie.
It is, but it is also interesting because that is one thing I was thinking about a lot while watching it again.
These
earlier
things
today.
These things are going to stick when you're watching for like the fourth or fifth time, right, as opposed to the first time.
Especially what is it, like 7 years later?
7 years later,
yeah. Where this is this has become a much bigger topic than I think it was in 2008 as well. Was the idea of looking at gender and how we should maybe rearrange the way we think about it.
Yeah, and I think you could argue that this movie enforces heteronormative norms. How would you phrase that? I don't know. I think it's just it reinforces heteronormativity because ultimately the representation of humanity gained by the robots is the straight romance.
And the human romance is also heterosexual as well.
Yeah, although it's like barely a thing, but
it is barely a thing. But still, I feel like if you take that lens and look at the film, it becomes a lot more.
Yeah, but even more than that though. Like it's the ultimate thing we get is that Wall-E and Eve dating the past humanity, like we're talking about, is what ultimately saves the current humanity, and and then it's saying that the past humanity is the one that's good and is saving the current humanity, and the past humanity is the heteronormative humanity. So. Ultimately, that one is the good one.
Yeah. You could have easily actually made a very interesting argument by having the sort of new humanity be a little less heteronormative or binary.
Yeah, I guess it's just generally nothing, though, right? Is what?
Yeah. There's essentially, I don't think the only change that comes back when they return to Earth is we have to clean up the planet. I don't think anything within humanity besides that, socially and otherwise, changes. So it's kind of static in that way, where it's old humanity comes to rescue the unfortunate newer humanity. One change being exercise more and clean up the planet.
Yeah. I mean, also the fact that it seems like there's no close interpersonal relationships on the ship, like John and Sarah.
I don't know her name.
Yeah. Their burgeoning romance, it seems like something that is completely new in the context of living on the ship.
Yeah.
Which begs the question, how are these babies formed, But that's actually...
we're not supposed to think about that.
That's actually a very big question if they're just in their hover chairs the entire time, right?
Yeah.
No, it may make sense if they have a DNA robotic process. I think that would make sense.
It's like the Matrix.
It's the Matrix is Wall-E, is that what we're saying?
Well... in another light. Similar concept of creating humans, but I don't think that's we're getting into deep world questioning.
It's Mary, not Sarah, by the way.
Oh,
okay, there you go. John is easy to remember because voiced by John Ratzenberger. So they worked really hard on that name. I can tell.
John.
You're gonna be John. He's gonna be John. But like they should. I think that makes sense for them to be really common names though, because they're like these non-important thing people who are just representative of anyone. Yes.
Well, I don't know if it's while we're on the topic of these sort of slightly problematic things. I also think it's unfortunate as well that despite that this is supposed to be a ship that's holding all of humanity, our three main human characters are all white.
Yeah, true.
And clearly American. I think it would have been interesting to look at different cultures. I mean, I guess it's sort of like when you look at the stuff actually on the ship, like the by and large milkshakes, like that's interesting because it's clearly like corporate America, and that's the way they sort of would have tailored their lives. So I guess that makes sense in that regard that they would be sort of American, but I think it wouldn't have been that difficult to make one of them not white. Or all of them.
It's the American thing. I mean, now you have to get into what is by and large an American corporation. Is the ship an American ship? But it doesn't seem like there are national boundaries when the world ends. It seems like it's more of just a by and large controlling things, right? So I don't. Yeah, the non-white thing though is they're all white. It can't be explained with where the ship is from, right? That's a bad, right? Yeah, that's what's the. Is white, non-white wouldn't be included in heteronormative, but I assume there would be a more overarching term to include that as well.
Yeah.
I don't know what that is.
I don't know what the word for that is, but...
White, straight, male. Yeah, that's that. All of these things are reinforced by this movie. We'll come back to this in a second when we talk about overall thoughts, but getting into some more specific narrative elements I really like, maybe just one more we'll see, is the use of music throughout. The Hello Dolly song. Is the song Hello Dolly or is the movie Hello Dolly?
The movie is Hello Dolly.
Do you know what the song is?
It's in the chorus. It's
put on your on your Sunday quiz.
I believe that's the name of the song.
Yeah. No, I have it. I have the Wikipedia article up. I'm cheating. So yeah, the use of that throughout the movie I think is incredibly well done. And it works really well, especially in the beginning, it playing with silence throughout the rest of the sequence. It's very striking. And they use it again. One of my favorite scenes throughout this, back on in space, is Wally and Eve outside of the ship with Wally with the like fire extinguisher and Eve propelling herself.
The sort of quote unquote dance scene.
Yeah, the dance scene, and the track on the soundtrack is called Define Dancing. Because from what the captain says, that scene is just I think that's a classic scene.
No, I'd say that's my favorite scene out of the entire movie, just visually, musically.
Yeah, like
it's just so well done.
It's it's so memorable, and
that poor robot that gets trapped outside.
But I love that, and I love the soundtrack during that. I love the rest of the soundtrack too. And then the last one would be the Down to Earth, the Peter Gabriel song during the credits. I've long loved that song, and it's just great. And the credit sequence is really good too, just artistically depicting the post humanity back to Earth type activities going on. I just love all of that.
Yeah.
Any other memorable scenes or elements? I guess the ending with Wally and Eve, that meant much less to me now than I remember it meaning.
Where they had their little static.
The spark, and also the entire time I was thinking how the mechanics of how that would work rather than being invested in the romance, because Eve changed his CPU. So how is he possibly the same person? His coding is different. I don't understand.
Meanwhile,
that's what I was thinking during that, rather than being invested in the romance. Nice. So that's current Dylan.
That's post college Dylan.
That's the current state of my person. Okay. So we talked about the beginning. We talked about Yeah, it's one thing that stuck out to me was how seamlessly integrated the climax of the movie was. I guess the fight with the captain and Otto, and during that Wally and Eve trying to get the plant back. I didn't recognize that was the I didn't necessarily remember what the climax was because that's not as important to the movie as other movies, and I didn't even recognize this as the high point until it was almost over. So I think that's a good thing because I think a lot of times this is important, this is the big moment, kind of sticks out too much in movies.
But I mean, and there is a basic formula in sort of screenwriting. By 30 pages, something's supposed to happen. By 90 pages, something else is supposed to happen. And I think in a lot of films, it's very obvious. And even in Wall-E, it's easy to track. But I do think that the climax was weaved very well with the 90-minute plot point, as it is called.
Yeah, I basically just wasn't thinking about the main arc, really. I was thinking about other things, and that's probably a result of that's so much stuff we talked about going on.
Yeah.
Any other things specific?
No, I think that's it.
Okay. So so overall, what do you think of this movie now? Better or worse than before? What types of things are you...
I still really, really like it a lot. Obviously, I don't watch it once a week like I used to. But I think it holds up extremely well. I think 7 years later, it's still one of the best Pixar films. And I think it's still a very relevant film, even with some maybe problematic issues. But
yeah,
it's nifty.
Nifty. Yeah. So this was, as I mentioned, one of my favorite movies ever when it came out. And I still expected to really like it, and I did, and it's still my favorite Pixar movie. Like I said, though, these Wall-E Eve romance elements are less meaningful to me now. I was surprised by how other parts of the movie were more meaningful to me now. That's, I think, what got me.
Is it still your favorite, though, even with that sort of shift in?
Yeah, and I think it is because of the corporations and the humanity kind of themes that I noticed more this watch. Those meant more to me this time. And I think it's kind of the mark of a great movie where you can watch it at different times in your life and it's still incredibly meaningful to you, although through different elements of the movie. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that, I don't know, maybe I even think higher of it now. I'm less likely to say it's the best movie ever. I honestly would have said that when it came out. I'm much more likely than anyone else to say an animated movie is the best movie ever.
My favorite movie of all time is an animated movie.
What would that be?
It's Beauty and the Beast.
Interesting. Oh, we could talk about that one. Yeah. I don't even remember. I've seen it, but it's been so long. Yeah. I don't know if we're going to talk about Disney but non-Pixar movies. I assume we will. Yeah. So I don't know. I would recommend rewatching Wall-E. I think it's an interesting one to see how you relate to it. A lot of people would still say that the stuff on the spaceship is not as interesting, and would say the movie is good but not great or something because of it. And maybe, I don't know, some of the stuff we discussed makes it more interesting. I'm not sure. But yeah, I still think this is the best Pixar movie. I still think it's up there of my favorite movies of all time. And I think it's gonna, I'm more confident that Wall-E will hold up than some other ones. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, my second Pixar movie is Ratatouille, and I'm interested to see what I think of it when we watch it. Quite like Ratatouille as well, and those are both from this era. I really hope Pixar can get back to this consistency it had around 2001 to 2008 with...
That might have been in between the Disney buy, though.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if it matters that much. I mean, Cars was in there, but other than Cars, which I don't think Cars...
I have not seen any of the Cars movies.
Interesting. I don't think... the original Cars, I don't think it's bad at all. I think it's maybe even quite good, but not up to the level of the other ones. Mm-hmm. Yeah, any other Wall-E thoughts?
No. I think I'm good.
You're good?
Yeah.
Which Pixar movie do you want to do next?
I mean, I really like The Incredibles, but I don't think there's too much to say on it.
I don't know. It's been
because
a while.
I don't think it has as much going on in terms of sort of stratified plot elements and what the narrative's trying to say.
Well, I don't think we're gonna get this type of discussion out of maybe any other one.
I don't know. I'm just thinking it's a fun movie. If someone else wants to do it, then I'm down if you want to watch it. But that's just because that's my favorite Pixar movie.
Yeah, no, I definitely want to go through all of these at some point.
Yeah.
I
mean, Finding Nemo is relevant at this point now, considering Finding Dory's coming out.
So I'll definitely do it before Finding Dory and stuff. Well, we could try to do all 15 up to the premiere of The Good Dinosaur in November. So we'll see. I don't know. Finding Dory is the next one after The Good Dinosaur. Interesting.
No one is more excited for it than Ellen DeGeneres.
She was very excited.
I think she personally funded the entire film.
She might have, yeah. I'm very interested to see if that movie is good, because that is Andrew Stanton as well. I mean, Andrew Stanton's WALL-E, Andrew Stanton's Finding Nemo. So,
yeah.
I mean, kind of one of I would say the biggest contributor, and we'll wrap up in a second, but one of the biggest contributors to Pixar's decline here from about 2011 to 2015, right? I think it's the fact that they had their best directors go on to Disney, took them and made them do live act. Not made them, I think they wanted to, but Andrew Stanton and Pete Docter both did. Is it Pete Docter or was it Brad Bird? Brad Bird and Andrew Stanton both did live action movies.
Yeah.
So,
which is why Incredibles 2 has forever been in production hell.
Yeah, but it seems like that's actually going to be Brad Bird's next movie now.
Yeah.
Which is very exciting. People love Incredibles.
I love The Incredibles.
I don't know if
I have nothing bad to say about The Incredibles.
I don't think I would have either. I think it means less to me than some of these other ones, but it's in my top 5, so.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's good to see, and Andrew Stanton and Brad Bird both back making new films.
Yeah.
I'm skeptical. I mean, I would prefer Andrew Stanton to do an original one, but Finding Dory is also exciting. Obviously, that movie. I think it's just our age bracket specifically that Finding Nemo means everything to.
Oh yeah, because I remember seeing Finding Nemo in theaters when I was a youngling, and I mean that's the same thing with the third Toy Story movie and then Monsters University. Is that they're definitely gunning for specific age brackets.
Yeah, and Toy Story might have been like. Might be more meaningful to like a slightly older than us group.
Yeah,
because that we were very young when
that came out in '93, I think.
Yeah, for context, we're 22, so that came out in 90. Toy Story 95, so
95.
We were not old
slightly
enough to remember
before
that.
Time to digest that film. But
I would say Finding Nemo, Monsters Inc. are like those are for me. Monsters Inc. was my most like childhood significant movie, I'd say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I just remember.
Going to see it. I was I think it was 9 when it came out.
Yeah, 2001, something like
that.
I
don't know. Math,
yeah. And then Finding Nemo's the next one after it, so that general time period.
Yeah.
I foresee a renaissance for Pixar starting with Inside Out. I think it's a good sign. I mean, it was Pete Docter is the one who didn't move on to live action, their incredible director. So, yeah, he was Monsters, Inc., and then Eat It Up, and then Inside Out. That's pretty good. That's a pretty good track record, I would say.
Yeah.
Okay, we've rambled enough. Let's I'm Dylan Hysen. She's Melanie Moyer. Where can we find more of your stuff, Mel?
Twitter @melmoy, Tumblr the Melmoy, because Dylan has my URL.
I'm holding it hostage. Yeah.
So.
And what about your articles?
Oh, I write some articles. Some of them might be relevant to you guys. There's one for Inside Out at blackprint.com. That's BLVCKPRINT.com. Cool. Look for my name.
And I'm Dylan_OVA on Twitter and Dylan OVA, one word, on Tumblr. And you can find all of the social media links to this podcast and our links at overlyanimated.com.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Any closing thoughts?
Nope.
Oh yeah, nope. I would say rewatch. Rewatch WALL-E. I was interested to see the different perspective now as opposed to a while ago.
If anyone's listening, do they want to tell us what Pixar movie we should do?
Yeah, you can also comment. I mean, we're going to do all of them, I think, at some point, but you can comment which ones we should do next. Send us an email or ask. You can find all those links on overlyanimated.com. Thanks, guys. Bye. We need to figure out an ending, but
yeah, we do.
Bye.